Hey, it's Terry, and this is the Something Spooky review for Antrum. Antrum was released in 2018 by Uncorked Entertainment, and it was directed by David Amito and Michael Lacchini. It has no reported budget or box office. It is a smaller scale independent production. There aren't even enough reviews of it, critical reviews on Rotten Tomatoes to really report that score. It is available on Amazon Prime, and I had just heard a lot of people talk about it on social media. There's a buzz about it online, so I thought I would check it out. The central premise of the movie is that it is a cursed movie. It's a movie within a movie, so the movie itself is this kind of documentary, supposedly, about this cursed movie from the 70s that anybody who watches, they die. So I watched it 2 days ago, and I've made it so far, but if suddenly this channel shuts down, then you know what happened. But so the basic concept is cool. I really like that idea of this cursed movie within a movie. They do it in a documentary fashion, so there's footage before and after the movie of people talking about the actual film that is supposedly found and being shown for the first time. So it's a great concept. There are some cool scares along the way. There are some downsides, though. There's basically a non-existent plot in the actual cursed film itself that we are spending most of our time watching. The documentary elements are uneven, that it's not perfectly done. And maybe most pressing, there are some fallacies in its own lore and its own concept that are kind of disappointing. But so the problem is that we watch the documentary parts that lead into this film that is lost from the 70s. I believe it's 1979 is when Antrum is supposed to be from. And even though it is being kind of couched in that perspective, we are still watching this film, and we have to kind of, evaluate it on those terms. It doesn't get a pass just because it's a lost or cursed film or whatever. And so the actual film itself, Antrum, while cool, has some problems. And the most dire thing for me is that it does not feel like a film from 1979. It uses a film language that is very modern. It uses a lot of horror tricks and horror sensibilities that are decidedly modern and are not anything like what was happening in actual horror movies from the 70s. So that kind of takes me out of it. I wish it would have felt more like an actual 70s horror movie. This just goes to things like the editing, the camera style, the story structure, just kind of the whole way that the scares are presented. And I'm not talking, there's this extra layer of tampered third-party footage in the film that they don't know where it came from. I'm not talking about that stuff. I'm talking about the actual Antrum film that is being presented does not feel, even like the most esoteric 70s horror films, something like Phantasm or The Exorcist, they operate with a more traditional film standard and practice. They still feel a little restrained by film, what film was at that time and all of the film history that had led to that point. Whereas this feels very much in spirit with modern horror movies. It isn't a word anachronistic. It just feels a little out of place in its own story where it doesn't feel believable that this movie is from 1979. A grainy filter and, dated wardrobe and stuff, that alone does not provide enough of a sense of time for this kind of concept. And the other thing that this kind of leads into is it just kind of gets lost in itself in this way, in that it's hard to imagine this Antrum film that, is being presented being a film with a director and cast and a crew. It's presented in a way that is it almost seems like it's confusing itself for being a found footage film. Because really, when we're watching the Antrum film, it's well, I'm not real worried about these characters because in essence, they are just, actors. This is a movie and there's a crew behind them and this is a script or whatever, and so what's supposed to be scary is that I'm watching this cursed movie that is going to curse me, and the actual film itself, instead, Antrum kind of feels like it's trying to be scary in this modern horror movie sense where we're worried about the characters, and just the way that it's told just doesn't make a lot of sense for what it supposedly is. Basically, it feels like modern filmmakers making a retro piece, and that's what it is. So it's a really cool idea, and I don't mean to be mean about it or too harsh. I just like the concept so much, and I wish that they would have been able to kind of find the actual language of that film that they are presenting in a more authentic way, because to me, it really just took me out of the experience the whole time, where I was trying to enjoy it, but it's man, this is not a film from 1979, so I'm not worried about being cursed or dying after watching this or whatever. It just really took it out it took me out of it. But you know what? After a while, I decided I needed to just put that out of my mind and kind of get over it and just accept. All right, so I'll make up my own lore. It's a recent cursed film. It doesn't have to. There's really no reason it had to have come from 1979. It could have been released in film festivals a decade or two ago and been cursed and lost all the same, and then it would have made more sense that it felt like this modern film. So I started to just try to think about it like that, and that did help me. There are things to like in this film, so I was kind of so critical about the way it presents it, but it just is this weird stumbling block that gets in its own way, because otherwise there's a lot of cool scares in there. There's a lot of things that I do like. There's a lot, like the shadow people, and there's a lot of like creepy satanic imagery, and a lot of just quick and subtle scares that feel modern, like I've talked about, but are actually very cool. So once I kind of got past that initial block, I started liking a lot of these things. It still has other problems too, though, just as a film. And again, most of that is, in the Antrum part of the film, which we do have to, evaluate as a film that we are choosing to watch, whether or not it's real or cursed or whatever. And, in that film, even though there are these cool scares and a cool atmosphere and some good visuals, there's basically no character development at all, or real plot progression, really. It basically just boils down to two characters kind of tumbling down this scary rabbit hole and things escalating and getting scarier. And like, it's cool. There are some good moments along the way, but, as a film, it itself is not great, and it's at least 2/3 of what this film that we were actually watching is. And then, like I said, the documentary parts around it have some interesting ideas, but also have their own faults. There's a few other things worth mentioning. That there's like this spliced footage kind of all through the film that is also from this third kind of film that we are apparently getting cut into this. Nobody knows where it came from. Most of that is the most graphic stuff in the movie. So the actual Antrum film, for the most part, does feel like a breed of horror that would have been acceptable in a cinema in the 70s, at least, even if it's not necessarily like feeling like that, but it would be acceptable. And then these like grainy shots are a lot of the more graphic and kind of like jaw-dropping things that clearly don't fit into that kind of movie. And it's meant to give it this extra element of spice, I guess, of like modern scares where like it actually is very scary. And I just could have done without that. It just seemed kind of pointless. I guess the idea is kind of creepy that there's something that has been put into this cursed lost film, but it just really didn't add too much and just seemed kind of unnecessary. So overall, Antrum has a lot of great ideas. It has a lot of heart. You can really feel that the people who made it, really believed in it and were trying to do something cool. And it does a lot of cool things. It has some great ideas. It is just, far from a flawless execution. It is kind of amateurish in some ways and just kind of stumbles over its own feet in points. Overall, I'm going to give Antrum a B-. It's interesting, it's creative, and it's worth watching, but it definitely has some problems. Hopefully that we'll continue to see these directors iron out in future movies. So hope you enjoyed this review. If you did, please like it, give it a share, and remember to follow Something Spooky.